I got my laptop on, and I feel alright. I got a few joints rolled, and my munchies made. Got my headphones on, and I close the door, don't disturb me. It's time to stand up tall and say some things about the shitty world we're living in, with the boys at Raconteurs News. To Raconteurs, to Raconteurs, to Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News, Raconteurs News. Oh yeah.
Good evening and welcome to Tuesday on Raconteurs News. I'm Andy Young. I'm joined as ever by my trusty co-host Jason, and for those of you that listen regularly, you'll notice I've had a few weeks off. Jason's been holding the fort along with Tony Hurst. Thanks, Jason. You've done a grand job, mate. I really enjoyed that interview you did last week with Diane. It was fabulous.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it myself. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, also, I think you did something pretty special there, because I got the feeling at the end of it, even though I'd spoken to Diane for 2 or 3 hours the previous time we interviewed, I felt like I knew her an awful lot better after you did that.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say. And a big welcome back to you as well. I really have missed you. I really did miss you last week. Yeah,
I've been missing all of this, really. It's been nice to take a break, because I think sometimes you don't... Doing what we do, it's not really a job. It's more a hobby than anything, or a calling. But you kind of get pulled along with it, and you don't realise that how much it's taken out of you. And, you know, it was starting to drag me down a little bit. I've took a break. We've had some time out in the fresh air. We spent a whole weekend at a Beltane festival. We had about 150 pagans.
Oh yeah, tell us about this. This were in a field in Mablethorpe, weren't it? The lovely Costa del Mablethorpe.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've had my chakras balanced while I'm there electronically by a lovely lady called Rachel from Lincoln. We did a labyrinth. Some guy laid a labyrinth out, and you walk down this labyrinth, and you got some kind of weird experience from it. Tina got more than that from that than I did. There was all kinds of other stuff going on. I mean, the bands that were playing were absolutely phenomenal. We've got a couple of tracks tonight from James J. Turner, a guy that first came across his stuff when we played a track for Michael Obanisia, that Heart of Gold. Uh-huh. And he was there playing, and I had a good old chat with James. He's a top guy, and I'm hoping that he'll come on and have a chat to us sometime soon, because he sees a lot of the things wrong with the world that we do. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation about his journey. But I think we've got to leave.
Whoa! Just hang on there, cowboy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, you've been away for a few weeks, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you. Because tonight I think we've got quite a bit of a showstopper on tonight. So I want you to introduce the guest. I want to give him the biggest introduction that you can.
Well, this is a tricky one because I've read Peter's bio, and if I were to read Peter's bio out, we'd need 3 hours, not 2. So what I'll do, I'll give you a brief introduction. I first met this gentleman over 2 years ago at Holmes UFO conference. We struck up a bit of a rapport. I've since interviewed him twice on different radio shows. One of those didn't go terribly well. The second one, I think we made amends for that. But this gentleman's not been doing radio shows for some time for various personal reasons, and we're very happy to bring him back on the air tonight and to talk about what the future holds for tonight's guest, Peter Robbins. Welcome, Peter.
Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good to be back on with you.
It's fabulous to have you back. And so Where do we start, Peter? It really is a cornucopia of delights for tonight, isn't it?
Well, I was born in Queens, New York, in the days following World War II, and I can fill in a lot between then and now, but a lot of it's pretty superfluous. Why not stick with the present?
Yeah, that's always a good place to go.
Yeah. I am on with you guys fresh from a presentation in New York City last week, which was kind of experimental for me in that I gave a talk that I had never given before in a venue, a circumstance that I don't often get to speak in, rather than at a conference or for an organization or with a substantial crowd. It was more in the old world salon tradition of 20 or 30 people in a very informal situation, in fact, in a friend's home in Manhattan, and a fairly substantial home because most people in New York City have quite small flats. And the challenge for me was to put together a talk, something I've been kicking around for a long time, that would give a compelling overview of the whole subject of UFOs, why we're conditioned to think the way we are about them, what are some basic things to take seriously, to not take seriously, what is some of the best and most compelling evidence to leave us to understand that some UFOs are truly anomalous advanced machines from parts unknown, and that we as a culture have been conditioned to think so little about it, belittle it, think negative thoughts about it, geared to a non-ufological audience, regular folks who are living their lives, doing their work, and who have enough interest to come to their first UFO talk at a friend's or an acquaintance's invitation, but also make that same talk completely relevant to folks who are steeped in the stuff as we are. So it was a really interesting challenge. And I chose images to illustrate my points that I often didn't use. Love the fact that it was a small enough group, 25 or so, that they had my full permission to stop me anywhere mid-sentence for clarification. They also absolutely understood that it was a work in progress, so to say, and I was looking for feedback, suggestions, criticisms, anything they could offer me to make it stronger and something that I could add to the list of subjects that I am called on to cover in my work. It was also a particularly great week to be in New York City. Got to see a bunch of old friends, hit the Museum of Natural History, one of my favorite museums in the world, and the museum, that night at the museum, that popular Ben Stiller film some years ago with DR Robin Williams was set in. And by the way, they actually do that now for students. They allow them to stay overnight at times, which is great. But I'm gearing up now for a series of talks and appearances that I'm just really looking forward to, guys.
That's great. So I'm really looking forward to working with you on an ongoing basis, because we've already said that we're going to do a series of updates on what's happening with Peter as time goes forward. So that is something I'm really excited about. We do have one or two guests that come on and talk to us regularly, but it's just nice to be able to just keep that bit of continuity there. I'm really looking forward to that, Peter.
Yeah, and we will certainly get to the Rendlesham part of this discussion in due time. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to let your listeners know, because I know some of them are in the States, some of them may have some time when they could jump into any of these things. And one in particular is coming up in Europe, and I am hopeful that more than a few friends from the UK can make their way over. First, though, in a couple of weeks here in New York State, I'll be taking part in a conference in a little village. It's not even a village, it's a hamlet called Pine Bush that draws a very strong parallel to its better known cousin, another little village located in Scotland called Bonnybridge. Pine Bush is a rural location about 2 or so hours drive north of New York City. But it's also a hotbed of verified UFO activity for reasons we can only make our best educated guesses about. The credibility of the sightings and the events there is really quite unquestioned, as is the broad variety of credible witnesses who have come forward about it. It's not far from a large American air base in a town called Plattsburgh, which might account for some of it. But it truly seems to be an area that's just a vortex area, a window area. Use your favorite word for it, but it just doesn't stop. And 4 years ago, the municipality decided it wanted to create some kind of event to mark this fact. And they ended up having a small kind of children's event that went very well, but mostly for the entertainment of young people. After that, it moved on to be fairly vendor-friendly, with a larger group of people coming just for the fun of the event. Last year, we added a small conference, an actual conference, and this coming year, in fact, on the 20th of May, which is a Saturday, we will have a 4-person conference, probably 100 vendors, I'm sure thousands of people visiting. And like Roswell or McMinnville in Oregon, it's a chance to celebrate the subject culturally, as well as educate yourself to some degree on the seriousness. I'm particularly pleased that along with myself and Mark D'Antonio, a wonderful scientist, will be speaking about the exoplanets, and Travis Walton, who will be there for a screening of his film, to talk about the film, as some of your viewers and listeners had the chance to enjoy last autumn. I believe it was in Homeforth.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be doing that same thing on the 20th. However, we have a special guest who'll be doing her very first ever conference in the United States, the Norwegian experiencer and artist Kate Thorvaldsen, who has, I have to say, a remarkable story that's really unique unto itself. And I say that as someone who has heard hundreds of credible accounts of things that have happened and events that have occurred to people. The very next day, and this is all fairly new and something I'm very pleased about, we'll be screening the film again with Travis present to take questions from the audience afterwards here in the town that I live in, Ithica, New York, in the center of New York State. It will be 100% benefit for a wonderful historic theater in the middle of town that is a nonprofit and a huge music venue and entertainment venue, and can use all the help they can get. So anybody in Central New York State, or if you know anybody in Central New York State who you would like to have this experience for, $10, $6 if you're retired or a student, get to meet Travis Walton, see this documentary with him, ask him questions. The information can be found or can be found shortly at the website for the State Theater in Ithaca, New York. And that will be an event that, again, I'm really, really pleased about being a part of. Lastly, for the moment, I have kind of back-to-back presentations in June and July that are both particularly significant for me. One is an invitation to return to a completely unique conference that will take place on the 17th and 18th of June in beautiful, historic Athens, Greece. And it is specifically built around an interest in the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich, and with particular emphasis on how that work pertains to Reich's interest in the subject of UFOs. Dear colleague Richard Dolan will be joining me there, some great Reich scholars, and it is called the Contact with Space Conference. I encourage anybody listening who is lucky enough to have some discretionary cash stuck away and that time free to come and join us in Greece. If you can, we will also get to hang out together, do a little sightseeing, I hope, and meet some wonderful people. And hey, here's some terrific presentations. I go from Greece directly to New Mexico. This summer is the 70th anniversary of the events that occurred outside of the town of Roswell, New Mexico. And it is going to be one big hunkin' significant conference and one of several going on in the city of Roswell at that time, bringing in some of the best known and most respected presenters, speakers, researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors on the subject of UFOs.
That's brilliant. Well, Roswell is the real biggie. You know, it's 70 years this year, isn't it? I know so many people who've wanted to go to that, and a lot of people are disappointed because it is a big step for a lot of people in the UK to get across to the States.
Oh, absolutely. And once you hear, you know, even though it's not a relatively expensive part of the country to stay in, you still have your associated expenses. Anybody with a serious interest in the subject of UFOs, if they can get over to Roswell at least once, you know, it's sort of like a pilgrimage of sorts. The events that happened there 70 years ago have had an impact on the world that I don't think we can fully calculate, in part because we are constantly in the middle of it as people with interest in the greater subject of UFOs. But not surprisingly, it's a very interesting American town, and in some ways fairly identifiable as towns, cities in that part of the Southwest are. In other ways, pretty damn unique. And in some ways, laughingly so, with alien eyes on all of the street lights looking down at you at night, and other little details that you can imagine.
So you'd say Roswell is like the mecca of UFO research. Anybody that's got an interest in UFOs, or anybody that's had any experience, then to visit. Is there? I'm sort of interested if whether there's an energy in the place as well. You know, whether you can actually feel the energy of the place, and do you think that that's just the people gathered there, or do you think it's something that's residual?
It's a good question, Jason. I think that the lure of Roswell, or if you want to impress the people that live there when you visit, pronounce the name correctly, Roswell, not Roswell, as we tend to pronounce it, Roswell. When you visit Roswell, you are surrounded by the historic artifacts of what happened there, even if they're minimal. There are still parts of the original 509th Army Airfield Base there, including the hangar that history tells us the debris from the crash and the corpses of the beings that did not live through it were brought before being shipped out to Army Air Corps Command in Texas. One of the things that I like to remind people of to keep the whole UFO story relevant in actual history is that 23 months before the crash, the hangar that stands there was the departure point for an American bomber that then flew on to a location in the South Pacific where it had a nuclear device attached to it, then flew on to drop that device over Hiroshima in August of 1945. In other words, the exact same hangar where the alien debris was brought is where the Enola Gay began her flight to Japan to drop the first atomic bomb on that country. So as far as the energy goes, for me as a Northeasterner, that whole part of the Southwest is pretty special. Once you leave town, the vistas open up. It's breathtakingly beautiful. Maybe for particularly sensitive people, particularly loaded locations, will register. I don't know if I'm that sensitive, but I know it's a fascinating town. I really enjoy returning, partly for the unique cultural aspect of it, and also because I'm lucky enough to have a number of very good friends who live there.
Yeah, I can imagine you could almost draw a parallel between... I've never visited the States, but I get this kind of image in my head about Roswell. A parallel with a particular place that I've never spent any time in. I've only passed through, but it had a very profound effect on me, and that is Glastonbury.
Oh, boy.
I went to Glastonbury, and as soon as I got within a couple of miles of the village, town, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I'm like, what the hell is this going on? It was almost like the air was full of something. I thought it's almost like static electricity, but I thought, no, it's more than that. The air's full of magic.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, because you've got all that history there at Roswell, you're going to get a similar sort of feeling if you're sensitive to that sort of thing.
I don't know. For me, it's sort of like comparing apples to oranges. American history is relatively brief.
Yeah.
In terms of the European presence, it's truly ancient. In the UK, I remember with great fondness my one visit so far to Glastonbury and how knocked out I was. But that was real and palpable with a history going back eons into, recorded and not so recorded realities. But it is a loaded piece of real estate for sure.
So do you think that places like Glastonbury and Roswell probably to a lesser extent because of the lack of history that it's had, I mean, it's only 70 years since it happened, but do you think that the people that visit there who come with excitement and want, do you think they leave energy behind and that's what gathers up and becomes residual?
I think that's an important question. I would substitute a town in Arizona for Roswell in the context we're talking about, and that is Sedona, which is a truly mystical place in its own way, which goes back to roots to Native American traditions and not just European traditions. It's also breathtakingly beautiful. To try to address your question, Jason, about 4 years ago during crop circle season, I spent a little time there, had a wonderful time, not near enough, but dear Gary King, who's, I think, one of the most knowledgeable and grounded crop circle researchers anywhere, who is in Wiltshire full time. He's not a commuter, so to say, that he showed us to the most newest sites. It was a spectacular experience to me, and people have asked me on and off over the time since I've been there, did you feel something special, standing in the crop circles, which I guess is what it's all coming down to here. I can say wholeheartedly yes, but I know that feeling that I had at different times when I was there was informed not just by whatever the presence, the energy is, but in fact by the excitement, the novelty, almost suspending my adult reality for kind of a sense of wonder that you have more as a kid than as a grown-up. And the fact that it was the most beautiful day of the year. I mean, I half expected to see Jane Austen come riding up in a coach. It was just one of those kind of days with clouds that looked like they had been painted in. And I can't claim to separate the threads, of those feelings. I just know I was pretty ecstatic most of the time I was there. And it's also very different being on the ground, even if you're on a stool or a small ladder. In a crop circle, you have that sense by the sweep of an arc, 50 meters away from you, that you are somewhere in a large contained structure. Mm-hmm. But we're so conditioned to looking at these beautiful photos taken from aircraft, from helicopters, and personifying them. It's a very different reality when you're on the ground with them. I found it great fun to actually have a schematic in hand, or be looking at a schematic of this brilliant geometric shape, and where the little dot that was me would be in it.
So I suppose what I were asking you there, I'm sorry, Andy, I know you've got probably a ton more questions than me, but I just want to sort of pin down this. What I think is that when you get places like this where historical events have happened and people have been drawn to them over the years, I think a little bit of energy is drawn from each individual person that comes, and that in turn collectively becomes a consciousness, and people can then attach themselves to that consciousness when they go, and they can feel that consciousness. So what do you think about
that? Your guess is as good as mine. When we start to deal in theories around this kind of sweeping energetic functioning, especially it applies to locations with an ancient history. It's empirical fact is very difficult to establish in a scientific way. And for me, part of it comes back to something that weaves its way through all of our collective thinking in paranormal studies, mysteries in history, the UFO phenomena, which was perfectly captured in the simple 4 words of the poster that we see for the first time in the pilot episode of the X-Files, I want to believe. And we all, consciously or unconsciously, have certain things, aspects, stories, hopes that we like to think about, fear thinking about, hope are true, make sense to us, etc. Beyond that, I'm damned if I know, Jason.
Yeah, a very tactful and diplomatic answer, I thought, Peter.
I'm good at saying I don't know when I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think if a lot more people did that, we'd be dealing with a lot less bullshit, wouldn't we?
Amen.
So you're away to Europe in June, and then you're back for Roswell. So yes. Any plans to visit the UK at all this year?
Absolutely, although they're still unformed. I know that there are a number of conferences coming up between now and the end of the year, most of which, have their speakers announced or fully lined up, some of which do not to one degree or another. And I am hopeful in being included in one of those rosters. It's been a couple of years since I've been over. No, well, that's not true. I think of Scotland as a separate country, and I visited there last year. But a few years since I've been over to England. And I'm hoping one way or the other that either I will have an invitation to return and to speak. And if not, I owe it to myself and some of my dearest friends to get over by the end of the year.
Fabulous. We'll look forward to seeing you. I just hope it's not too far away from...
The other, I'll be back before the end of the year.
Oh, sorry, we got a bit of a pause there, Peter. Skype was just being a bit pausey like it is sometimes. Yeah, I'd certainly look forward to meeting you again. And
indeed,
it really doesn't matter where it is in the UK. We're going to be there.
Well, again, if it's on my own, I will probably split my time between London and Suffolk. And I'm aiming, if nothing comes up before then, to try to be there for Christmas and New Year's time this year. So
yeah,
that's where I am at the moment.
Excellent. I'll look forward to hearing more about that as time goes on.
Yeah.
So you've done your new talk there, and from what I gathered when we were talking previously, you're going out into some other new areas that you haven't really dealt with in public before.
That's true. Even over the many years that I was primarily working on Rendlesham Forest-related stuff, I was always doing my own side research into other areas of UFO studies that simply had captured my imagination one way or the other. You know how it is in life. Sometimes you stumble on a subject or it comes to you and you become quite obsessed with it and you've got to power through and complete something on it. Other times you can come and go from it as a project, as an interest, as a little obsession for a prolonged period of time. And that's the way it is with me. There are other subjects that I researched many years ago that it was time to return to and see if there was any new information that might make it compelling and noteworthy yet once again to present on. Over the next couple of months, some of the subjects that I am developing for talks or aiming for just after that really run the gamut. One, my main talk of the two that I'll be giving in Roswell is on something I may have even discussed with you in a past show. It absolutely fascinates me, and we all turn it over in our minds at one point or another, I think, in coming to an interest in the subject of UFOs, but then move on to other things, and understandably so. And that is what I call the origin of the UFO ridicule factor. Simply put, how is it that if we lived in a world where this were not some crazy, misunderstood, complex subject, and people didn't see UFOs, they saw conventional flying objects, and we run into each other on the street, and I say, "Hi, Andy," or "Jason, the funniest thing happened to me last night or yesterday afternoon. I was out walking the dog, or I was playing with the kids, and I looked up, and I saw this thing or things in the sky, behaving in a way I had never seen anything behave in the sky. They seemed under intelligent control. It was disc-shaped. It was no bigger than a star. It was as big as 2 aircraft carriers. It was round. It was square. It was triangular. It did this. It did this. And then it disappeared or flew away. I wonder what it was." Now, if we lived in the same world, you would either say to me or think, "I'm guessing. Gee, that's interesting. I wonder what it was too." Is that a fair assumption?
Mm-hmm.
How is it that instead of that, we live in a world so counterintuitive that, and I don't mean the three of us, I mean the general public at large in the Western world, are deeply conditioned to think, or if they're brash, say, "I wonder what's wrong with Peter. Is he having a mental episode? Has he gone mystical on me? Does he want to feel special?" That's one of my favorites. Is he a hoaxer? Does he want to have some fun and play a trick on me? Does he want to be famous? Another very practical one. It makes no sense. How did that happen? How could that have happened? This is a subject that for any inquiring mind should simply be seriously interesting. And yet it's become a joke in the Western world, in the press, in the popular imagination, and in popular culture. Again, there are many exceptions to the rules. I think things are changing for the better every year. I think it's fair to say that every year, more people care less and less about what other people think about what they think about the subject of UFOs and taking them seriously. So it is a paper that goes to the heart of the origins of the ridicule factor. And there is a very definitive BC and AD, so to speak. This was not really a factor in Western culture before the summer of 1947. And afterwards, it has remained one. And with condescension, sarcasm, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, the whole 9 yards. So it will be a main paper that I will be giving in Roswell, and it was not an accident that it happened. It was a decidedly conscious effort that was brilliantly successful and spearheaded by American major newspapers and publishers, editors, and I think with the tacit encouragement of officials high up in the Truman administration. Veering away from that, another subject that I have an interest in relative to the phenomena that I know other colleagues share is UFOs and aliens are irregularly used to sell products to us in adverbs. It can be on the TV, it can be in a magazine, it can be certainly in a newspaper, and they also run a huge gamut. Everything from a mom and pop operation selling your children an ice cream to a major multinational, international tech corporation, not only using aliens and UFO-related imagery to sell us their products, but with specific references to back engineering, to abduction, to all of the things that make up UFO studies. So over the decades, I collected clipped ads. Friends would send them to me, I'd find them myself, and over years, I developed quite a file of them. I added to that with images that I would find online for selling products in Europe, in the UK, in the US, in Central America, in Japan. And so that second talk in Roswell this summer takes on the notion that this is going on, certainly, but is it going on because it is part of some overriding, orchestrated, hidden hand plan to help normalize the subject and lead us on at a livelier pace toward disclosure, or however that manifests itself? Or is it simply the fact that alien imagery and the images of UFOs, people find them intriguing enough to stop when they see them in an advertisement and will sometimes respond and buy products? Or is it some hybrid of the two? And I will certainly not give you the answers to those two talks, but hope to give them in the UK at some point. Another subject that I take very seriously has to do with the use of UFO mythology, so to say, fairy stories, myths, programming, as used by cults over the decades to enroll innocent lost people in becoming a tool, a slave, a pawn in their particular game. And at present, I am working on developing a very serious talk on just that. Some of the cult activity or interconnections are fairly innocent. Others are just the opposite and potentially extremely dangerous. These are subjects that I don't see being discussed on the conference circuit in general, so I'm all the more glad to develop them because they're important, they should be heard and spoken about, and niches given to them. In Pine Bush, later this month in this little New York State conference, I'm going to be giving a revised reminiscence on my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Bud Hopkins, who we lost, coming on to 6 years ago in August from cancer at the age of 80. Somebody who had tremendous admiration for, who I was so fortunate to work alongside of for so many years, and have an awful lot of fun with, as well as some extraordinary adventures in the process. And I think his relevance is as important now as it was when he was alive, if not more, because the subject continues to demand serious attention. And Bud's research specialty, as many of your listeners know, was nothing less than really being the leader, the founder, the father of the serious scientific study of what a lot of us feel is the most troubling, complex, and unnerving aspect of the whole UFO question, namely the UFO abduction phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you did touch briefly, with some depth on the ridicule factor there, and I know for me, my personal experience, I'm now 50. I'll be 54 this year, I believe. But when I was 12 years old, I had my own personal first experience, and I wasn't actually terrified by the experience. What terrified me was the thought that if I told anyone about this, I'd be locked away in a loony bin.
Right.
So myself and my friend made a pact that we would never breathe a word of it to anyone. Yeah. And in fact, so successful was that pact, I completely forgot about it for 35 years. And in spite of 2 incidents in between that and me remembering, it still didn't trigger the memories of the original incident. That only came back to me when I heard somebody mention a blue ball of light on a documentary.
Wow.
So the ridicule for now, I don't give a damn who knows that I've seen UFOs and experiences. If you think I'm mad, so what? I probably think you are.
I think that's very well said, and courageously so, Andy. I can relate in that when I was 14, as many people know, I had a profound UFO sighting with my sister Helen. Mm-hmm. It so overwhelmed me in that, like you, in my own way, I understood that the adult world had prejudged this subject and that it was loopy-loony, not true, unreal, the stuff of silly, stories, but in no way authentic. And I was so concerned about the ridicule that I had a similar, and for me, probably for you also, unique experience. I managed to forget about it as well. It was that upsetting to me that I didn't want to deal with it to that degree. And more than 14 years later, for a number of reasons I now understand quite well, that memory came roaring back into my consciousness. And it was that after my sister to discuss our sighting. And that was the afternoon that she first talked to me about her abduction-related memories. And that was the afternoon, essentially, that my career sort of jumped the tracks, and I ended up doing this work rather than what I felt I was going to do at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm. We're getting quite a few questions from the chat room here, Peter, but we're going to, for everyone's asking about the... well, it's been called the L incident so far. So what we decided we'd like to do is to keep that for the end of the show, because we really want to talk about what's happening with Peter going forward, but we will address these issues at the end of the show. But one question I did get for you, when you were mentioning other things that you were looking into, Dan Allspark asked if you looked at the Star Child skull yet. As surely as a UFO researcher, you must have had a look at that.
Look at what again?
Sorry, the Star Child skull. It was being looked into by Lloyd Pye before his untimely death.
I have looked at it and have not had the chance to, in depth, really familiarize myself with the material. And so I have to apologize for that. I know it's an important one to a lot of people right now. I sometimes simply can't keep up with what amounts to new breaking information. And rather than voice an opinion on something I really don't understand enough to have an intelligent opinion, forgive me, but I just don't know enough to comment on that intelligently.
No, that's fair enough, Peter. It'd be pointless trying to waffle on about something you didn't know that much about. And there's too many people out there doing that, but I didn't say that. But it's that is a subject we will cover. We will cover it at the end of the show. Please be patient. I know we've got a really busy chat room, and I'm pretty sure it's because we've got Peter on tonight, and people wanting to know what's going on with Peter going forward. And yeah, obviously there is that question, but we'll get to that towards the end of the show. So we've got
Nicely
somebody
swerved there, by the way, Andy.
Sorry?
Nicely swerved.
I don't think I was swerving it. I confronted it and said, yeah, we're going to deal with it. But yeah,
no need to get defensive.
AC 130 is also saying that Andrew Johnson is the man to speak to now about the Star Child skull. And I know Andrew's, well, what doesn't Andrew look into these days? He's got an incredible knowledge. He works quite closely with Dr. Judy Wood, whose book I'm midway through at the minute, and hell, that is quite a read. But
we had them both on as well, didn't we, on Raconteurs News as well? So we had a couple of times.
Yeah, and I think we need
to do that again.
We need to get Andrew back soon, and definitely Judy as well. But yes, so that's covered your trip to Europe, possible trips to the UK. Is there anything we've missed in this first hour, Peter, that you can think of?
Well, fingers crossed. I'm hoping that by the end of the year, I will be returning to Tokyo to speak at a national conference there, sponsored by an organization called OUR-J, OUR-J, Organization of UFO Research Japan. I was last there more than a dozen years ago.
Wow.
It was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. Certainly something I would have never gotten to do if it hadn't been for Life in UFO Studies. And one of the things that they had asked me to give a paper on last time was the state of UFO studies in Europe and America compared to Japan, which I'd had some years to familiarize myself with. And the irony for me was it was just after the very untimely and very sad death of Graham Birdsall, who is one of the greatest guys I ever met, and certainly a giant in the world of UFO studies, and somebody whom I think the research has never fully recovered from his monumental loss at 49 years old in 2004. But this time around, the Japanese have a particular interest in Roswell. And while I'm hardly the most informed specialty researcher on Roswell, I am not a specialty researcher on it. I had the honor of working as an employee, a consultant for the city of Roswell for almost 3 years. And networking on UFO-related matters with the office of then Governor Richardson, and assist them in their conference planning and in bringing more tourists to the area. But the Japanese had specifically asked me to create a talk on the Roswell incident for a Japanese audience that wove in a considerable amount of personal material around two important figures in the story, those being the original Army Airfield intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel Sr., and his son, who we lost about 3 years ago, or not quite, Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. And I am working with the family in making it a very special presentation. I don't know, who knows how much we're really going to know about what is really going on around this subject by the time we head on to whatever comes next after this life. I made my peace years ago with that I probably would not have the answers that I began seeking 40 years ago, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just the way it was. So what are we in this for? I think number one, to add to our knowledge of what the heck the story is and the nature of these other intelligences, where they're from, what they're about, to some degree. But again, knowing that we're not going to learn all we want, or even necessarily most of what we want, where's the value? Well, for me, it's in being part of something much larger than myself and helping people educate themselves to the reality of breaking through that ridicule barrier, so to say, of not feeling awkward about saying to other people, I take this subject seriously, and I've got good cause to, and if you're interested, I'd be glad to speak with you about it or loan you something to read or watch, and then we can talk about it more. And I guess, finally, because of the people that it has allowed me to meet and interface with, to get to know to some degree, to make friends with, and real friends, even when you don't see them for prolonged periods of time. Yes, it's UFO studies that got me that perk, but it's a really important one to me. And I would have probably written one or two or more full-length books over the decades if I was not in the, some people think, neurotic habit of really trying to keep in touch with everybody I care about in this life. And people who seek me out with questions, some of which I can help them with, some of which I can. I think it's an important responsibility, and I take it seriously.
Yeah, I do know where you're coming from on that, Peter, because I mean, I've only been doing the radio thing for like 2.5 years now, but as time goes along and you gather these friends and contacts, it becomes more difficult to keep up with the communications because it just grows and grows like a snowball. And having had 3 weeks off now, I don't know how long it's going to take to get caught up with my emails. So anyone who's emailed me and waiting for a response, I do apologise. I will be onto it this next week or two, and I will get back to you. So yeah, that I do fully appreciate what that's like, Peter, and it's never easy. I did miss a trick earlier when you mentioned Travis. I didn't mention the excitement we'd had in Raconteurs Towers earlier today, because I spoke with you about getting Travis on the show when we talked a few weeks ago, and we actually got a reply from him today. So we're very excited about that. Travis has already agreed to come on the show. It's just pinning him down to a date. So real excitement building there.
That's wonderful news.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know how I could have missed that when you mentioned Travis's name.
Well, as you guys know, I mean, he is one of the best interview subjects imaginable in a world where so many characters almost compete for the sensationalism, for the audience, for the opportunity to go on record, to, be a player. This is a man.
Well, I think I must be leaving, 'cause it's down the road I'm going. It's a rocky path I've chosen that takes no prisoners to set you free. Oh, I'm gonna use my mind's eye, and I'll let intuition guide me. I will leave the past behind me for a place I'd rather be. And if your heart is on a mountain and your soul is in the sea, and your head is in the clouds, you could come with me. 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 Oh, with one eye on the future fail. I will live in all dimensions, and I will feel my senses burning. Try to lose the constant yearning that guarantees I will fail. And if your heart is on the mountain and your soul is in the sea and your head is in the clouds, you could come with me. 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 We'll go where horizons meet the sky, where the rivers join the sea. In sacred groves we'll set our spirit free. Come with me. Oh, mountains, fields and forests, I will plant my feet more firmly. I won't let anything deter me, 'cause the path is old and it's mine to take. See weld in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. And if your heart is on a mountain and your soul is in the sea and your head is in the clouds, you can come with me. 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 We'll go where horizons meet the sky. Whoa, 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 whoa.
My name is Michael Urbanisia, and I'm the producer-director of The Great British Mortgage Swindle, and you're listening to autonomousmedia.net.
Right.
And welcome back to Raconteurs News this Tuesday evening. I'm back from a 3 weeks break. We're in fine fighting form. I've got my chakras balanced. I've got me, everything's all sorted. We're rearing to go, and we've got a really busy chat room, and we've got a great guest, Peter Robbins. Welcome back, Peter.
Thank you.
And welcome back, Jason. No, Jason's not back yet. So welcome back, Jason, when you get here. So, yeah, you mentioned you got something else you wanted to mention about one of your new talks, Peter. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Over the decades, we all keep our ears to the ground. There are reports of events, some which don't pan out to be authentic, others which do, but still leave many questions unanswered. And one that has intrigued me since it was reported in 1989 involves one of, if not the best known event in the end of the life of the old Soviet Union that occurred in Russia in a city called Voronezh in 1989 in November, that involved nothing short of a landing in a park in that city of a craft of undetermined origin, the presence of beings, some of them seemingly robotic, in the park, multiple witness accounts, physical evidence to back it up, a number of books published about it, and I'm going to be giving a talk this summer in Athens on the Voronezh UFO incident, looked at in perspective from now, almost 20 years after the fact, citing the connections I developed with one of the key investigators on the ground there at the time, the information we exchanged, and that probably a year before we would not have been able to exchange given the fast deteriorating nature of the Soviet Union at that time. Also, the particularly cavalier and condescending, yet strangely obsessed behavior of American major media. They couldn't leave this case alone. And as much as they wanted to discredit it, it would not go away, and they kept covering it to a degree unlike anything I had seen for any case in the American news cycle for decades prior to it. Again, that's the Voronezh UFO incident, one that some of your listeners may be familiar with and that others have never heard of, that I will be giving a serious presentation on this summer in June in Greece.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Peter. So, yes, now I feel the time has come where we'll perhaps do with addressing this rather awkward subject. And I think...
Get your popcorn out, everybody.
Yeah, get your popcorn out and your rotten cabbages and rotten tomatoes to throw at me and Jason. But I got a message. Well, I've had lots of messages over this subject over the time. And what I've been very determined to do is really to stay out of it, because I see a big division being created here. And there's a good friend of mine, David Young. I met David at loads of conferences. I've got a lot of time for the guy. In fact, David even predicted that I would be UFO Master... Oh, sorry, I was showing me trophy there. I realised my camera's not on. UFO Mastermind 2015. And he was right. But David asked me, he said, well, he put a post up on Facebook and he sent it to me and asked me if we could address this with Peter. And I'll read now. This is a direct quote from David. It says, "Remember this from Peter Robbins, published in Left at Eastgate, New York City, 1996. Our hope is that readers will give us a fair hearing, then begin to pursue answers to that question for themselves. Also this. With the publication of Left at Eastgate, Larry Warren has quite literally chosen to put himself, as well as the reality of those incidents, on trial. So be it. Well, I have believed the story in Left at Eastgate for so many years. Alternative evidence that I have both heard and seen directs me away from the story presented within that book. It is my right to now question and disbelieve the story that I once did believe. I am now pursuing the real truth and intend to find it and say whatever I like against a book I do not believe in. It is my right to do so. If the writers do not like it, writers do not like it, to onus is on them to persuade me otherwise, without threats and insults. Just because I do not believe, I refuse to be a sycophant." There it is, Peter.
Yeah.
Good one, that one, isn't it, Peter?
Yes, sir.
And what would you like to say to that, Peter?
Well, I said what I would like to say in responding to that statement by David's regarding my quotes earlier today on the SBI Facebook page. I think you have that in front of you.
Yes, I do. I can. Would you like me to read that out as well, Peter?
Why not?
Okay. Peter's response, I meant what I wrote back in 1996, and since then I've had no reason to change my mind regarding this quote. Back in 1997, I considered the publication of Left at Eastgate something important, something that would be of real value in shedding additional light on the RFI and my co-author's part in it. The book was not written in a time-sensitive manner, that is, as in case closed if the mystery isn't fully resolved by a certain date. If anything, we literally invited readers to pick up where we leave off, conducting their own research and investigations, and in the course of doing so, hopefully contribute something new to our collective knowledge of the events of December 1980. That offer is as valid today as it was 20 years ago. As far as I am concerned, anyone who has what they contend is credible evidence that runs counter to any of my or Larry Warren's published findings in Left at East Gate is encouraged to make it available to our readers and anyone else. It should certainly be evaluated as public, professional and dispassionate way as possible, with both sides of the arguments given the opportunity to present their cases and to ask and answer relevant questions. The truth will out in the end, as it should. That has been the driving factor for me throughout my RFI investigation and research. Even so, it is my right to also question selected parts of the story that I once believed without any reservation. That's
right.
it.
So, as a layperson, somebody who's outside of this, I'm not involved in the popular UFO movement, although I've got my own experiences. But
right.
It's quite outside the popular UFO movement. Can somebody tell me what this is about?
Sure. That since the publication of Left at Eastgate, more to the point, in the last few years since the publication of Left at Eastgate, a number of people have come forward to say that they have evidence, findings, proof, material that says, suggests, proves, shows that my co-author said a number of things that either are not accurate or not true or open to question. And my feeling is, let's see it all, come to our best opinions on it, and not back down from what the final information shows.
And I can tell from your voice that you're not really happy about all this that's going on, because I mean, I've noticed, I'm from outside the UFO community, and I've noticed it going on my Facebook feed, and I can sense from your you seem to be a little bit like you're like again, which I can understand completely, and we don't do that sort of thing on Raconteurs News. We don't sort of get people, we don't hijack people and sort of put them on the spot. But
no.
It does sound like that you're personally a little bit fed up with this.
I'm a lot fed up with it. This has been a really unpleasant, unhappy, and frustrating time for me. Like anybody who has a serious interest in the truth about UFOs in general, or about the events surrounding the Rendlesham Forest incident in specific, the truth is really all that matters. If it all turns out that some of the information that Larry put forward is not as stated, then the onus is on me for not catching it as the co-writer, and it's a shame. The reasons behind it, I can only make my best guesses at, but as somebody who's not directly involved, Jason, from somebody who is very involved but has not made myself available over a lot of the last months on details, specifically because I am waiting for as full a presentation as is realistic of the charges and the evidence to come to my best decision. And if it turns out that there are things in the book that I have spent 20 years being nothing but proud of that are not true, so it goes. However that impacts on me or people's take on me is the way it is. I don't blame anybody who feels that they've been slighted or, had the full truth adjusted. I don't know what the answers are. I have a couple of answers, but in the bigger picture, I, like a lot of people, am waiting for the fullest presenting of this on both sides. And as I say there, truth will out in the end. And this will sort itself out. And if it hurts my credibility, that's simply the way it is. It certainly is not going to stop me from continuing my work and contributions in this field, but it's a really unpleasant thing to go through, to put it mildly.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions in the chat room about the A10 photo. Now, I'm not familiar with this. I think I've seen it. I think it's like a little black and white image, and I think it's called the A10 photo because of it's a photo of the A10, which is a road in Britain. And no, it's okay. Fair enough. You take it away then, Andy.
I'll just correct you on that. It's of a photograph of an A10 Warthog aircraft, supposedly taken above Rendlesham Forest. It was, I think it was credited as a snap taken by Larry with his new camera in the daytime that the incident occurred to him in the forest that evening. But there's a lot of question as to when that photograph was taken. There is some suggestion that it may have been taken while Larry visited during his honeymoon in 1985. Is that correct, Peter?
There is that allegation, and damned if I know what the truth is.
Same here.
I thought I did, but I may not.
I mean, I can only imagine how this must have upset and disturbed you, Peter, because I'm nowhere near as involved in this. I'm just someone who's interested, watching from the sidelines, and it has really dampened my enthusiasm for looking into the subject and for visiting the conferences, because I've had some of the best conversations of my life at UFO conferences.
Yes.
But in the last 6 months to a year, it's been pretty much taken over by the Larry situation, the RFI, and really, that whether Larry's right or not, something happened there.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who've been looking into it. There is so much credible information that whether this information is proven to be right or wrong in the end, there is something there. I would love to get to the truth of it, but don't want to be debating who's right, who's wrong, who's a shill.
Yeah.
Well,
as don't be disheartened as far as the greater subject goes. In my 40 years experience in this work, I've certainly seen my share of contentious cases, to use a dispassionate word, when we're talking about people's bloody lives, and the claims and attacks and counterclaims that assault them when you go public in this subject. But the greater picture is not what we find surrounding the Rendlesham Forest case growing over these past few years. There can be altercations, certainly arguments, discussions, proof, counterproof, but this is at a level of real unhappiness and kind of mutual brutality I'm unfamiliar with. And I would not confuse it with ufology overall, which is a fascinating study of the authenticity of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications, the beings that are behind them, and everything that goes with it. Kind of apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it concerns me that so many people who've gravitated to either side of this fallout have in the past been great friends.
Yes.
And that makes me very sad, because I've got friends who are on both sides of that divide.
Agreed.
And it has adversely affected those friendships in that we don't talk as much as we used to do. And that makes me very sad. But what I find difficult to deal with is I can disagree with you, Peter.
Yeah.
And I can disagree with you, Jason. And I disagreed with an awful lot of people who I spent the weekend with over many and varied things. But we still sat and we drank and we smoked till dawn.
Yeah.
And we all had a great time. Nobody stomped off. Nobody threw the toys out the pram. We all just had a great time, but we didn't agree on everything.
Yep.
But
this, unfortunately, is not that. And the disagreements, for lack of a better term, are so deep and so entrenched. And I don't see how we're going to get back to a point of goodwill and amicable review and study. It reminds me of the American Congress right now, where it's just a mess, a complete mess. And I think that it's been exacerbated by people being accused of things that they never did, and based on a false premise, even more bad blood being pumped into it, and more people taking adamant sides, and the whole thing becoming completely emotional and filled with righteous indignation, rage, frustration, and everything that goes along with it. And again, that's why this thing needs to be aired, and ideally in as grown up a form as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh,
yeah. So I think you're a bit of, looking from an outside point of view, I think you're a bit of an innocent victim in all of this, because you haven't really got a position. It's just that you've got an association with Larry Warren.
Well, yes and no. I appreciate what you're saying, and right now, the most frustrating thing for me is I really don't know the answers to a good number of the questions that I need to, express a final opinion on this. I do know that if the worst proves to be true, then the fact that I did not catch the things that entered our book that are inaccurate are on me. That's just the way it is. If you're an investigative writer and you research almost everything that is being put forward to you, but you neglect to research, investigate everything as opposed to almost everything, and in some cases you simply
well, how deep do you go, though, Peter? How deep can you go? I mean, what do you do? I mean, you can't. You can only go so deep. You've only got so much time. You've only got so. It's a finite amount of time. You're writing a book. How deep do you go?
Yes and no. I had hoped the writing of our book would, in fact, be more finite, a year or two, instead of 9 years from shaking hands to selling the book to almost another year to publication. So there were times that I cursed the fact the book was taking so long to write, simply because it was beyond my expectations that it would have taken that long. And, I thought there was life after the book at some point. But the fact is, in a good way, the fact that it took so long wasn't a negative. It allowed me to more fully research aspects. And for example, if you go into that book to any of the 300 to 400 fully annotated, footnoted references that I make, none of them have ever been attacked because they're all 100% accurate. But whatever discrepancies ultimately are in that book, I either should have dug deeper, or asked more questions, or been less trusting, or I don't know, any combination of those things.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice there, because I think that you're perhaps being a little bit overcritical on yourself. You're a writer, and I'm sure that this controversial stuff makes up a very small percentage of the book itself, and the rest of the book is I would imagine, if you do your due diligence, like you're talking about now, and it took 9 years, I'm sure everything else is okay. So you can't really take away from a book just simply because of maybe 1% of it.
Well, thank you, Jason. I think it's probably more than 1%. However, I appreciate your point of view, but no, I don't see that I'm beating myself up or taking on any particular onus by simply being responsible for anything that I sign my name to, whether or not it's done on my own or conjunction with any collaborator at any time. That's simply my working understanding of how I proceed with myself. I think that overwhelmingly, in terms of pure percentage, page by page, word by word, yeah, it's probably a modest amount of information in that book that is up for reevaluation. I could be wrong. We'll find out over time, I imagine. But it irks me, it makes me sad and frustrated that if there's one thing that's been proven to be absolutely inaccurate, even if it's an unconscious error, even if it's a understandable mistake, a confusion, it does open up, at least philosophically, the door to anybody saying anything that I read in this book, if it's anecdotal and it can't be proved or backed up, if there's no physical proof to back up that this person said they were here when they were there at this exact time instead of this place, then I can't trust anything. That's a very sad and kind of final way of looking at it, but I'm sure there are some people that are looking at it with worst case scenario, and that is their right, unfortunately.
We've got a question in chat. What does Peter have to say about Adrian Bustinza? Bustinza saying that Larry wasn't there. That's a question from chat. That is from Mischief.
Well,
thank you for that, Mischief.
Thank you for that question. If that is, and I've read some of what Adrian has written around this, if this is his definitive final word on it, then I guess it will stand. At the same time, I have to question the communications from Adrian, minimal as they've been over the decades, supporting Larry's account, or very specifically several years ago saying, yes, Larry was there, with an exclamation point or a series of exclamation points. Again, Adrian is the final arbiter of what he has to say, but I'd like to know why he said those things back then supporting Larry's account and now is not. Again, for me, and I have to stress this, however this thing turns out is the way it turns out. I am certainly not living my life defending anything that is in that book. Hey, it's just another book, except for the fact that I wrote it with Larry Warren. And if somebody can legitimately call something into question and establish it, the same way that over the years, Jason, so many people came forward and added to the research that I had dug up with their own confirmations, or added to Larry's account with their own memories and information. Cuts both ways.
Mm-hmm. There does seem to be a lot of the argument that centres not only on Adrian's testimony that Larry wasn't with him, which I've only heard one interview with Adrian. I believe that was the one with Linda and John on Phenomenon Radio, which, right, from my recollection of that, he did actually say that Larry was there.
Exactly so. And that is another question that I have to ask that I hope Adrian will address. Mm-hmm. Again, he's a very important player in this. Yeah. We all acknowledge that he was there, that he was heroic in finally coming forward to put his voice on the line in this. But we have Adrian, in a funny way, taking two positions here. and that doesn't help us get to the absolute truth any more than any other dual statement or dueling statements that we have on the record.
I've got another post gone up saying that Nick Pope faked the photos. Oh, sorry. Sasha Christie and Nick Pope faked the photos in 2014. I mean, there's so many. Sasha faked it, Larry faked it, Nick Pope's now in the frame for faking it. I see Nick Pope's weighed in on the comments on the preview for the show that I posted today. It's quite unbelievable the amount of attention it's getting, really.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the comments you're referring to, and I was not aware that Nick was also being accused of faking any photos. Yes, Larry has long maintained that Sasha faked the photos that are proving to be embarrassing to him, and I hope there's some way this can be established so that people can say, right, there's a definitive answer. I have my answer, and I can go on to ask my next question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, something that I've even noticed, Ben Emlyn Jones is a good friend of ours. We put Ben's Banro show out on Autonomous Media Weekly.
Yes.
And I've seen that Ben's actually been banned from attending certain conferences for his part in this, which I'm just thinking, what the hell is going on? If organisers are banning people from one side or the other from conferences, surely this has got way out of hand and needs to be sorted out one way or the other once and for all.
Well, the complexity here, in part for me, is that Larry was there. He was involved on the levels that he says or not. Mm-hmm. He has put out different things to different people. Ben is a friend of mine, has been very straightforward in taking Larry's position, and there are things that Larry deserves to be backed up on. As far as the conference banning goes, my best understanding is that this is not some nefarious dark trend, but that the conference in question, a first conference by this organizer, who had already received confirmation responses from a number of people whose views are opposite Larry's. He then received requests for conference tickets from people who were very vocal in not backing those views, and was concerned about a potential disruption of the conference. I don't know all the details, and it's a shame. Ben is a good reporter. We disagree on a number of things relative to this, but agree on other things, and I hope it can sort itself out in a positive way before conference time.
Well, we've had a number of people in the chat room who were made out, and I was just waiting for an opportunity just to say that Ben had not been banned from any conference, apparently. So there's a lot of people saying that he was not banned, and there are people now wanting just to make the point that Ben wasn't banned from anywhere, and we don't. And there are some people that just said he twisted some words, and perhaps he might have been told he was not welcome somewhere, or he might have been given the impression he's not welcome somewhere. But anyway, he was not banned.
I'm glad to hear that, Jason. That's very good news as far as I'm concerned. I'd be happy to take any questions from your chat room that you want to ask me. Absolutely any.
Well, how many we getting here? We go.
Ben has actually posted in the chat room earlier and said he was banned from attending conferences, but we've got the various posts saying he was not banned. He's twisting words. He was respectfully asked not to attend because he disclosed personal information about the four main investigators.
Okay.
So that's perhaps a bit of a contentious subject if you're not sure. Nick Pope. Oh yeah, there was a comment about Nick Pope that's probably not best read out.
Okay.
Question for
I'll
Peter.
have a scroll back for that one.
Be fair.
Question for Peter from Uniquely. Has Peter read Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, and does he have an opinion of it?
Yes, thank you. Philip's book came out in the summer of 1997, and I was most aware of it, picked up a copy early, had heard a certain amount of information, claims leading up to the book about what we would be expecting, had a very kind of split reaction to it. Colonel Corso was, in fact, the acting mayor of Rome, so to say, in a military sense, was connected to some very high-level people at the end of World War II, and may or may not have been privy to extremely above top secret information regarding Roswell and the like. Where I had a real problem with Colonel Corso's account is that he maintains that after the Roswell crash, in so many words, the debris was put away, just sort of warehoused, and then 10 years later, somebody said, hey, what about that debris? And dug it out and called in Colonel Corso and said, we want you to look into this and figure out if it has applications for industry and things. And I remember having a number of arguments, discussions, talks with colleagues at the time, including Bud Hopkins, and I just didn't believe the premise. If there was a crash of something as major, of a advanced machine of undetermined origin 70 years ago in the deserts of the Southwest, does anybody think for a moment the American government or the military intelligence community working with the American government wouldn't have grabbed up every piece, set up a huge research project, poked and prodded and took everything down to the hairpins to see if they could figure out what was happening? That makes sense to me. The fact that it was put away for 10 years, like it was forgotten, and then a distinguished American military figure is called in to sort it out, I don't buy it. And I wish I did, because wouldn't it be nice? But I have a problem with that basic premise in his book.
I've got an interesting comment here from Alison that I'm going to read out, and I'll give my take on it, and then I'd like you to give yours, Peter, and yours, Jason, as well, if you've got anything to add, because I think you might have, Jason. Alison says, I think it's really immature, and no one has any real reason for slagging off Nick Pope, other than he realised LW was not being truthful many years ago and severed the friendship, as Peter inevitably did. Well, for me, Nick Pope's statements on the Larry Warren issue, one way or the other, carry no weight for me. For me, if I had any reason to poke fun at Nick Pope, it would be because of the words that have come out of Nick Pope's mouth. There's an interview somewhere on YouTube that he did, I believe it was with Jon Snow of Channel 4 Television, and if I'm correct, the year is 1992, and in that interview he said, some UFOs are definitely aliens. And if you hear him interviewed on a TV show that is basically a debunking show, Nick will say, oh yeah, no proof that they're aliens. But if you hear him on a show that's saying, oh, yeah, it's all aliens, he'd guarantee that Nick will say they're all aliens. So Nick seems to change his opinion in accordance with the people who are paying to say what he says. Would you have anything to add to that, Peter?
Well, only to say that Nick, who certainly is knowledgeable on Rendlesham, on the subject of UFOs in general, is the only member of the UFO research community ever to have the kind of position that he had in a governmental office and be privy to certain information, is entitled to absolutely any opinion that he wants. We haven't always agreed on things, no question about it, but his input is as worthy of respect if it's, put forward in a manner to contribute to the dialogue as anyone's. I agree with Alison on that for sure. I think also I have to say, from a personal point of view, Nick and I have certainly, been on better terms than we are at present in great, overwhelming, if not complete part over aspects of the RFI and our relationship with Larry. But there was a time years ago where we were all good friends. And I have many good memories of that time with both of them, all of us together. Mm-hmm. And it's just one more thing for me that just makes this whole thing a damn shame, but as necessary to pursue in as faithful and ethical a manner as any of us can.
Okay. Jason, have you got anything to add to that? Because I know you've had dealings with Nick.
Yeah, I had dealings with Nick Pope a few years ago when he were on Edge Media, I think it was, Edge Media TV. And I was in touch with somebody that was living within at the time, and I offered for him to take a lie detector test that I would pay for. I put the money up front for him to take a lie detector test, and he completely refused, completely ignored me. So that's my dealings with Nick Pope. That's it.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. And really, I mean, we with Travis, we've heard all about the lie detector test, but then there are pitfalls with that. It isn't entirely definitive one way or the other, is it? Particularly with only one test.
No, absolutely not. No, but it would have given a sort of indication, wouldn't it? I mean, if somebody fails a lie detector test, particularly, I mean, we're talking about 2000 and probably 2008, 2009. Yeah, I think that it gives you some sort of indication as well, doesn't it? But it would completely exonerate him as well.
Well, for starters, polygraph is an inexact science. And as I have now come to understand over the years, it's not out of the question for somebody to train themselves or be trained to beat it. Also that other events having nothing to do with it, but of an upsetting or traumatic nature that might be playing on you at that moment in your life when you are being tested, could give a false reading or contribute to a false reading. At the same time, they are very accurate in other situations, especially in something like the Walton case, where 6 different individuals involved in, if we're not to believe it, perpetrating the same lie with their ringleader, Travis Walton, all of them several times. It's off the charts in terms of how it does serve as a real proof.
The probability is off the charts, isn't it, of them all completely passing a polygraph test.
Well said, James. Well said, Jason.
Yeah, I believe I believe Travis has passed 6 or is it 7 polygraphs.
I don't remember the number. I will ask him when I see him in a few weeks. Mm-hmm. But an extraordinary number of them. And as it's pointed out in the documentary, Travis, the true story of Travis Walton, mm-hmm. It's one thing for one person to trick a polygraph. If 2 people have conspired in a crime to get their stories absolutely accurate, and once again, being put through the test separately to come through with flying colors, that's a real accomplishment. If it's 3 people who have, taken part in the fraud or the crime, that much more difficult. As far as the number involved in Travis's incident, all told, even our dear former profiler for the FBI who takes part in the documentary, Ben Hansen, essentially says that, this is off the charts as far as from an FBI point of view. It's the real deal.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what's new in the UFO world? What's on your radar at the moment? What you've been watching? What you've been seeing? What you've been doing? And also, What I wanted to ask as well is that we've got Roswell and the Rendlesham Forest incident, which were quite well known to people in the United Kingdom and America and the United States. But what about other incidents that have happened that are just as notorious, that have happened worldwide, that perhaps we've not heard of?
Oh my God, that's a huge subject that you open up here. What's new with me as far as UFO, cases and studies and things? You pretty much got it. I've had my, I've been tunnel visioned on the subjects I have under development, keeping as close an eye as I can on how things continue to develop in the RFI controversy. I don't have a lot of spare time to search the internet, looking for new breaking stories. I basically begin to look into them, Jason, as people bring them to my attention at this point. My career in this work, if you want to call it that, has gone through a number of different incarnations and, ways of using your time and focusing your energy. One of the things I'm trying to do as much as possible is work in collaboration with different colleagues, even if it's just in terms of brainstorming, feedback, writing an introduction, doing a read-through of a text that they're working on, supporting them by being at an event that they're going to be speaking at, bringing new work that they're doing to the attention of other people in the research community and to all of us at large that are following these subjects. I don't have a lot of room and time in this whole thing to see myself or any of my colleagues as super special or deserving of more overwhelming respect than the next person over. There really shouldn't be room for prima donnas in this work. We are all in it together, from the best known, from the most knowledgeable, to the most curious and the least known but most sincere student of it. And we're only going to progress in this. Well, I can't say that. There is the wild card of, and going back to the beginning of our interview, talking about the talk that I have in development that I gave a version of in New York last month. We are not only all in this together, but we, by networking with each other, by adding to the collective pool of knowledge, by deepening our relationships with other colleagues, by sharing information, we may well get to contribute to this mythical thing called disclosure. At the same time, one of the questions that I took up in this talk, geared for beginners and for knowledgeable people, was granted that a number of countries, and the UK certainly can hold its head high here in many respects, have gone out of their way to release documentation before the MOD ceased doing so categorically some years ago, and now does so occasionally. Their program of releasing, declassifying, and putting up online on the MOD's website documents that you could see and read for yourself in the original form should always be applauded. Granted, there's very little in the way of smoking guns, if ever, but there is interesting smoke, isn't there? And there is the reality that no matter what, the American government, no matter who's in charge, continues to refuse to release a damn thing. I think that that will probably continue on unless any given president has such a need to put attention over here and say, take a look over there and not at my situation. They might play that card. Otherwise, I wonder if they ever will. So to go to the question again, I found myself thinking out loud and showing examples of what might, in fact, spark a wider acceptance of the subject and ultimately have the impact to bring down this wall of secrecy that still surrounds so much of it. Might it not be a WikiLeaks type release of information or something from Mr. Snowden. These are two news sources that didn't exist, 10 years ago. During the height of the Vietnam era, probably not terribly well known to a lot of UK residents, a very distinguished American psychiatrist took part in the illegal release of documents around how bad the Vietnam War was going. And that information really did damage to the American government's position and helped to undo the support for the war that existed. The psychiatrist's name was Daniel Ellsberg, and the declassified documents were called the Ellsberg Papers. You can Google them. I remember in the late 70s, there was a time in my first few years of pursuing this subject with a ferocious obsession that we learned, colleagues and I, that NASA had available a catalog. This is all pre-digital. This is all the old analog days that you could order. And it had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little numbers in it, each one corresponding to an 8x10 actual photographic glossy, not a Xerox, but the actual chemical print, taken with Hasselblad optical technology from satellites, American satellites, circling the moon or making a pass around Mars. And I think it was a great public service for NASA to do it. I think it was $1 a photo. And my friends and I kicked in, and we got a couple of dozen photos, then divided them up. And we all took turns looking at each other's photos with magnifying glasses. My dad was a jeweler, and I grew up with one of my little toys being a 10-power jeweler's loop. And I and some of my friends found some things in those photos that made our jaws drop. There's no way that NASA thought this through, or that they had the manpower to have personnel look at every tiny micrometer on each one of those photos to see if there was something that might not prove to be embarrassing to the point of view that we are alone in the universe. And I'll tell you what, we found some little things here and there on the surface of the moon and on Mars, some of which have now become parts of anthologies. Years ago, David Hatcher Childress wrote a book called Ancient or Alien Archaeology, I think, or Alien Archaeology. And it had some of these images, but they were like third and maybe even fourth generation Xeroxes. So they were breaking up. NASA discontinued that program not long after that, in the late 70s or early 80s. And I don't know what happened to those photographs, but I'll tell you, if those photographs made it to the BBC News, all of the major media that we can't trust, CNBC, Fox, the New York Times, the Times of London, you name your favorite mainstream, are they telling the truth, media venue, it could also help to crack things wide open. Those photos are breathtaking. And they support the notion that we have been duped from the word go. Then there's always the possibility that they, in quotes, and there are likely a variety of theys here for a variety of reasons, that they might just play their card. And after 70 years in modern times and thousands of years going back to ancient times, been letting us know 1, 4, 7, 10, 20 people at a time that we are not alone, that for their own reasons, they may feel time's up. You're going through the eye of the needle, brave new world, congratulations, get ready for a rough couple of weeks. Here we are.
Yeah.
Anyone's guess.
Yeah, I see we're getting a few questions as we're nearing the end of the show, and it seems the ones who had the questions about Larry are probably not very happy with your answers, Peter. There's been accusations of waffling, and somebody said, just give me one solid copper bottom fact, just one. I kind of knew this would happen. I knew that we would get a lot of people here wanting Larry to be torn apart, and I knew you weren't the kind of guy who was going to do that. I knew you had things that you wanted to say about this to make it clear your position.
Well, let me say something regarding your question then.
Please.
One absolutely spot-on fact that I have a big problem with is last year it was brought to my attention that there was a statement Larry makes in the book that was untrue. It was hardly, a room shaker, but if true, then it was a problem. And that was that in the book, Larry refers back to an interview that he had with the News of the World reporter named Keith Beebe that was excerpted, so the reporter claimed, for the lead story the day that the whole Rendlesham thing broke, if I remember correctly, Sunday, October 2nd, 1983. And I don't have it in front of me, obviously, but as Larry, in his writing, reads through, he notes that something that Beebe said that couldn't be true because he didn't tell it to Beebe. Okay, life goes on. Last year, Ronnie Dugdale, who was a friend of Larry's and is just the opposite now, who was a friend of mine who I dropped as a friend, and I may owe a huge apology to for doing that in that context. He contacted Beebe, who he learned not only still had a transcript of the original interview, but a tape recording of the interview that he did with Larry. And it was a substantial interview, which Larry claimed was not the case. And in fact, he quotes Larry on something that Larry said he didn't say. End of that particular story. This is the problem. This is a problem. And I'm not going to attack anyone until I have all the facts in. And one thing that I have been consciously not doing is anybody involved in the so-called RFI dialogue can verify is not taking part in that dialogue. I have made, 5, 6 statements, all brief, over the past year. And I will continue to keep it like that until I have information in front of me that I can respond to as fully as possible. I'm sorry if I disappointed that particular caller. That's the way I'm operating on this, and respect me for doing so, or don't. It's your call, and it really doesn't affect me either way.
Just one last thing. Somebody did make a point earlier on. I'm going back to the A10 photo again. But somebody made the point that you could see that it was Larry that was being reflected back. I mean, do you have any view on that?
No, I actually have not studied that photo. Call me lax to such a degree that I can claim that I know that. If that's true, he took the photo. There's no question about that. I guess I need to catch up on my reading there on how that reflects negatively on him. But I know that there are serious claims that photo is not what he purported it to be. And if that proves to be the case, then that's one more problem that I have.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much for answering that question. I just noticed that you were in the chat room and people had been mentioning it before. So I think we're about ready to wrap up, aren't we, Andy?
Yeah, I'd like to say a big thank you, Pete. It's been an absolute honour to get you back on air and doing interviews again. And we look forward to catching up with you again in the near future. I'd like to say to everyone, if tonight's been a bit heavy going for you, stick around, because the happy hour girls will be long at 10 o'clock. So Tina and Not Dr. Tamara will be on some happy subject tonight. I'm afraid I don't know what it's about, but they'll have something to talk about. And before we play out with a tune from James J. Turner, I'd just like to give a shout out to some of the fantastic people I met at the weekend and spent time with. I'd like to give a big shout out to Sarah, who was one of the main organisers, along with Julie. Sarah's daughter Hannah, who actually paid the bill so the thing could go ahead. There was James J. Turner, whose music we're about to play shortly. Merlin's Keep were fabulous. They've given us permission to play their stuff. Andrea Ferguson from Northern Ireland. Wow, what an incredible voice. I've just got a message while we've been on air from Andrea. She's happy for us to play her music, but she's recording some new stuff now. So just stick around, and we've got some great music lined up for you in the future for the breaks. Thanks again, Peter. Thanks to everyone in the chat room and everyone who's listening for the great questions. Sorry if you didn't get yours answered, but there was so much scrolling past there. I picked out what I could. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back again, same time, same place next week with Colin Johnson and his friend Jason, who had his home stolen by bailiffs recently and has had a quite remarkable result in court, which we'll be telling you all about. So thanks for listening, folks. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Jason.
Cheers.
And good night.
Good night.
I need to find a tune, don't I?
Peter Robbins has gone.
Oh, he's dropped off, hasn't he? Oh, shame. Right, I better get ready to drop. I don't know why it started bloody doing that.
It's because you're rubbish, Andy, and you've been away for a little while.
Oh, shit, man. Where's the fucking outfit?
Soul and a handful of mud, spirit and soul and a handful of mud. Hey, oh yeah. I'm not such a fool to think you can buy it, possess it and keep it in a cage. I choose to be open and endlessly try it and constantly engage with the music, the mystic, the beauty and the words that leap right off the page. The sun and the moon, the stars and the earth, and all the sacred ways. Spirit and soul in a handful of mud. 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 That fly away, save them in a bottle for another day.
Everybody get out of the room, there's a cockney on the loose. And watch out, he just might wink at you.